Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Monster Families. Today we're going to be going over the skeletal mages. As you can clearly see, I have some of the skeletal mages here. These ones in particular are poison mages. And we do have some interesting information to cover with these particular monsters, and it has to do with the fact that, well, like, I always kind of assumed that, like, each monster type was just kind of, like, set in stone, and that as you went through the game, if you found a poison one or a cold one or whatever, that it was a different variety. But apparently that's not how it works. Apparently each one of the mage types can potentially be different varieties of damage, depending on the type of skeleton mage. So as you can see here, it says these animated skeletal remains of slain sorcerers wield the forces of elemental magic as they sow death throughout the land. Able to deliver considerable damage from a distance, these undead mages can be exceptionally dangerous when congregating in large packs or under the direction of the remains of a particularly powerful caster. Skeleton mages and undead they're obviously undead monsters, so they're susceptible to all undead damage. But it says here, skeleton mages have elemental attacks such as poison, cold, fire, and lightning, and stats are listed for poison, cold, fire, and lightning versions of the skeleton mages. While burning dead mages only have 3 variations. So you might notice down here that it looks a little bit different from some of the other panels that I've brought up. They have like a multitude of different stats. And every single one being a different variation. Well, that's because each one, like the horror mage, can potentially be a poison, cold, fire, or lightning variant. The burning dead mage can only be 3 different variants. The bone mage and the return mage can be all of those variants as well. So essentially, whenever you're fighting them or whenever you find these guys, depending on the type, there's a very good chance that, well, the element type is just randomized. And that you're getting one of the random types. Now, the element immunities, if you look down here, is also different. So depending on poison, they're not immune to poison for some reason. I don't know why, because I thought all skeletons were pretty much immune to poison, but they do have relatively high poison resistance. But if they're the cold variety, they're immune to cold. If they're the fire immune variety, they're immune to fire. And if they're the lightning variety, they're immune to lightning. So very straightforward. Their resistances seem to match almost identically to whatever element it is that they're technically like immune to. So, like for instance, if you're looking at the lightning variety, the lightning variety has 50 lightning resistance in Nightmare and 115 in Hell. However, you notice that like even though the horror mage can have a lightning variety, the poison, cold, and fire varieties are not immune to that particular element. And if you go to the fire variety, you notice that the fire variety is immune to fire. They do have a small amount of chance to block, 9, 11, 15, and the horror mages have a 30% chance to block for some reason. Not exactly sure why, like they gave everything the chance to block, but they did. The Act 5 guest monsters are a little bit different. The returned mages are listed as fire and then lightning. The bone mages use cold damage, the burning dead mages use fire damage, and the horror mages listed use lightning and then poison. So in some of these cases, you will come across horror mages that have lightning damage, and then some you will come across horror mages that have poison. They are all immune to poison in Nightmare difficulty, and then in Hell difficulty, they actually have multiple immunities. Either poison or fire, or poison or lightning, or poison or cold, or fire and poison, or poison and lightning, or none. And this really comes down to what elemental type they are aligned with, which is essentially they're more generic than I ever really thought. I had in my mind a picture that the skeleton mages were like very specific, and when you went to go fight like the burning dead mage was always fire. But apparently that's not the case. Apparently each one of them does have their own variations, and these variations do actually have different element types. So when you come across a specific variant, like for instance a horror mage that is shooting, for instance, poison at you, then you have come across the poison variant of the horror mage, which is a very specific variant. I always thought the glowing hands was a nice touch, and I especially fear the poison ones, because the poison ones tend to be the worst due to the crit poison that they have. Although all of them can be particularly nasty if you don't have, well, the resistances to deal with them. Poison specifically is just one of those things that to this day, I still don't fully understand exactly how it works. It can be relatively low, or they can crit poison you, and it can be relatively high. It doesn't stack very well. And for this reason, I would probably avoid the poison versions of these mages. And this has to do with a bug within poison that basically makes it so that only one instance of poison will actually ever be on a target at any given time, the highest. So whatever the highest poison damage is, and it's not the highest damage, it's actually the highest tick rate, which is actually a problem with things like Venom, which have very high tick rates but very low damage, which cause them to overwrite very high damage, low tick rate poisons, which last for a long time but dish out less damage in a like per second basis. And because of this, like, you really don't want a large number of poison mages, because the poison mages will dish out one instance of poison damage to one target, and then that's it. Every other instance of poison from that point will only serve to refresh the poison and keep it running, but having like an army of poison mages, definitely not a good idea. Now the fire, the lightning, and the ice ones are actually pretty good. My personal preference is the lightning, because the lightning one tends to have the highest damage output, but obviously if you're running through the game and you're just simply like finding monsters, random monsters, there's no guarantee which one you're going to get. You may end up with the poison one, you may end up with the fire one, etc. And a lot of the times you're just, obviously using what's available. The cold one is probably, the cold and the poison are probably the worst, though, especially for the necromancer, specifically because the cold has the ability to potentially cause your bodies to shatter, which is something that you don't want. And the poison just doesn't stack, like, pretty much at all. It's also worth noting that summoning them as revives may not be a good idea for another reason entirely, which is that your revive bonus, so if you look at your skeleton mastery, it says monster damage plus 200%, which does transfer over to revives. The problem is that this monster damage is enhanced damage. It's essentially the same thing as what's on like a might aura. Which means that it doesn't affect elemental damage, and by extension does not affect revived skeletal mages, which means that they do not get any damage increase. So it's just something that you may want to take into account, that revives are generally best left to physical damage monsters. Or monsters that can actually be enhanced with physical damage. Like, for instance, an archer that's shooting a fire arrow is still technically getting enhanced damage, because that applies before the conversion to fire damage, which allows you to enhance the fire damage further, as opposed to the mage, which is essentially not getting any conversion. It's interesting that I just noticed that that even though my little guy is not green, he still has a green aura. That's really quite weird. His hands don't glow green like the one that actually was alive, right? But he does still glow green in the darkness, because he is, of course, the green variant of the horror mage, which is interesting. These guys also, of course, interact with the Haradrim, or rather the Greater Mummies. If you ever encounter a Haradrim or Greater Mummy in combination with mages, it's obviously a good idea to kill these guys first, because they have the ability to resurrect, obviously the undead monsters. And not only do they have the ability to resurrect the undead monsters, they can also heal other undead with healing abilities, which is also kind of nasty. So not only do they make it harder to kill the monsters, but they also resurrect them once they are dead. And in general, just something that you want to take care of if they are in combination with the mages. Mages tend to be not so much of an issue once you have good resistances. So if you have 75% resistances, you build a little bit of magic damage reduction. Things like that, like MDR and absorption. The mages tend to be relatively easy to deal with for the most part. It's mainly because they're primarily elemental damage, and elemental damage can be mitigated much easier than things like physical resistance, physical damage, because your physical damage reduction only goes to 50%, and also it is a little bit more difficult to absorb physical damage. Like, you don't have any ways of, like, Ravenfrost, which has cold absorption on it, or T-Gods, which has lightning absorption on it, and things like that. Like, there's no physical absorption. There is PDR, which is physical damage reduction, but it's not as good as the MDR and also the absorption abilities that you could potentially use. And you can even bring your cap for elemental resistance up even higher than 75% if you are specific classes or using specific items. And you can easily get that up to like 95% if you try, which means that skeleton mages can be mitigated almost entirely. Whereas something like the skeleton archer, on the other hand, which dishes out physical damage, cannot be mitigated so easily. Overall, definitely interesting monsters to see. Like they're definitely visually pretty from a certain regard. I think that they have one of like the prettiest effects because they shoot essentially like little poison bolts. And if you didn't notice, like the poison bolt that they're shooting is essentially a piece of poison nova. And a lot of the mage's attacks are like that. They basically have effects that are very similar or identical even to abilities that are in the game. Like, for instance, the poison variants are firing off a piece of poison nova. The fire variants are firing firebolt. The cold variants are firing off ice bolt. The lightning variants are firing off a charged bolt, essentially, like one individual charged bolt from the charged bolt skill. And essentially, like, each one of them is essentially just rehashing an ability that already exists within the game. And they did this a lot in Diablo 2, and I actually really admire it because it makes for a very interesting game. Like, you can tell almost like what ability somebody is using by like what you're looking at. Now, it doesn't quite look like a poison nova, but imagine, like 10 or 20 of these in a circle firing out in all directions, right? Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining. Be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And as always, keep watching.